Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. This is part 6 of our 8-part Halloween special. In this episode we'll have a close look at the Indian mythological creature or cryptid, the Wendigo. Part deer, part man, 100% scary. But first, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks, now let's go. We're going away for a short trip. I went to Texas to see some sights and see some old military friends. But don't worry, because this video is here for you. It's full of scary stories that are hard to figure out. Also, check out the link in the description box of my online store, which has a lot of new items and many different designs. Buy a shirt, take a selfie with your best pose, and send it to me in a DM. I'll give you a big shout out on social media by posting your picture. Let's get started. Hello. Is there anyone there? I've been trying for a long time to call someone on this walkie-talkie satellite phone. I got lost on the trail in this Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. I was only there with some family for a couple of weeks. My family doesn't like hiking, but they lived close to a national park, so I decided to spend the day there. I have a compass, but for the first half of the day I wasn't paying much attention to it. I'm pretty far into the woods now. I don't know where I am anymore, which has never happened to me before. This is something I'm pretty good at. The more I walk, the deeper I seem to get. I don't think I'm really heading in the right direction to get out of these woods. What happened? Did you listen to that? It seemed to be coming from that direction. Susan. Here, please. I'll show you how to leave. Hello. Who is it? How do you know what my name was? I moved slowly backwards on the dirt path. I left the trail and went deeper into the woods because I thought that maybe, just maybe, someone who could help me was there. I know it wasn't the best thing to do, but it was getting dark, my cell phone wasn't working, and nobody was answering this stupid satellite phone I bought at Walmart. I should have gone to Big 5 or Dick's Sports Goods, but I didn't. Well, too bad, it's a bit late for that now. I already said that the sun was going down. So now I could see less, and I didn't have a flashlight with me because I came here during the day. I started to hear the snapping of branches in the bushes. It had something going through it. I started to see a black figure in the distance, but it was hard to make out what it was. So I got closer by walking. Excuse me, sir. Where did we go wrong? I just need some help getting back to the parking lot. There was silence, and nothing moved around me. Not even the bugs are making noise. I got chills when I heard that. I knew right away that something wasn't right. I thought that someone really wanted to help me. Then, as I went deeper into the woods, I thought that maybe someone was just messing with me. But now that everything is quiet, I'm starting to think differently. I can see that. This thing with horns on its head that look like deer antlers is staring at me. This happened to me a long time ago, but I still dream about it. In Mississippi, we lived in a small town. At the time, we were both 8 years old. And when Stefan and I were in the 3rd grade and going into the 4th, we always cut through the woods between our schools. We used that trail almost every day because we were best friends, and it was also where we hung out. Most of the time, we did that until we heard the voices. Hey, guys! On our way home from school, we both stopped in our tracks and looked to our left and then to our right. No one else is in the woods with us. Many people didn't know much about this area. It was kind of our secret place to go, and if we were running late, it was a faster way to get to school. Hello. I said silence. There was no answer, so Stefan got angry and said, "Turd, speak up or don't talk again." Nothing was there? We just laughed it off and kept going home. The next day, I got sick with something like the flu. I didn't go to school for a couple of days because I felt so bad. When things like that happen, we have to walk to school and back on our own. After 2 days, I began to feel a little bit better. When the phone rang, my mom looked worried and concerned to whoever was on the other end of the line. While she was on the phone, she kept looking at me. I didn't know what to think until she knocked on my door and walked in. She asked me when I'd seen Stefan last, since he hasn't been home. I just shrugged. I don't know what I was doing before I got sick. I think that happened 2 days ago. The last time her mother saw him was yesterday. I told her that I didn't know. Since he hasn't called me or done anything else, I don't know. He might be staying with a friend or somewhere else. I didn't really know. I had no idea what to say to her. Maybe this kind of thing happens all the time in a big city. Kids go out, have fun, and sometimes get lost. But when kids go missing here, that doesn't happen. There's a reason for it, and most of the time it's not a good one. The next day, I went to school as usual. My mom dropped me off because it was raining in the morning. Everything was normal, except that I didn't see my friend. He's been out before, but it's usually just to a friend's house or something, and he usually calls. After school, things were different. As usual, I started walking through the woods to get home. About 3/4 of the way, Stephen's voice was coming from the woods up ahead. "Eddie, come this way, where are you? Everyone has been trying to find you. People told me that you didn't come home." I started jogging in the direction I thought the voice was coming from. Then I heard a sound in the bushes ahead of me. He must have done it. I kept running. I stopped when I saw our old clubhouse that we all helped build. He might be in there. I said to myself, "Dude, are you in the clubhouse? Where do you live?" As I slowly opened our clubhouse's hatch door, I saw Stefan at that time. His eyes were just open, glassy and wet. His torso, his chest was torn open, there was blood everywhere, and his heart was gone. I could have done this to my friend, which is when I realized who had been calling me earlier. "I'm not far from you. I live in northern Nevada, which is not always a desert like the southern part of the state. It's quite green, in fact. As you get closer to the Idaho border. I'm from a small town that's about an hour and a half northeast of Reno, but I won't say which one. This is a short story about something I saw in the spring of last year. I was driving my car toward town on the main road. As I was driving along, I saw a big group of crows to my right. In the distance, I could see tall grass plains that ended at the edge of the forest. I swore there were at least 50 or 60 crows flying around and diving around this area by the woods. At first, it made me think of the movie Jeepers Creepers. I swear it looked just like that. I just thought, yep, something's dead over there, and kept driving. I was the only car on the road at the time because not many people take that road unless they live in the area, and know how to get there. I couldn't help but be interested. I pulled my car slowly into the bike lane and stopped. I rolled down the window on the passenger side and started squinting in the direction of where the crows were flying. I swore to you that the crows had stopped making noise, but they were still flying around the area and circling, but they were quiet. It was like someone had a remote control and pointed it in that direction. There was no more sound. I know it doesn't seem real, But that's how it really happened, and that's when I saw it. The head of this thing looks like a skull. Its head poked out of the tall grass. It looked like a deer because it had antlers growing out of it. Its eyes were black and hollow, and its body was weak and thin. It stood up straight and used its long arms to point at me. It was aware that I was watching. I closed my eyes and kind of fell back in my chair. The thing was gone. I swear it was there 1 second and gone the next. It couldn't have run that fast into the woods. I had goosebumps everywhere. No one believes me when I say that I started my car and drove away after telling this story. But I know what I saw was a Wendigo because I know what I saw. I come from Navajo people and live in Arizona. I've asked my grandparents a lot of questions about skinwalker myths and legends, but they don't like to talk about it very often. Even its own people don't know a lot about it. People told me that the skinwalkers were witches that could change into wolves and other animals. But the Wendigo is something else. People say that it used to be human, but after it tasted human flesh, it changed and mutated into something evil and barbaric. Something that is no longer in this world. Something about the Wendigo is scarier than anything else I have heard or read about. They say it's best not to talk about these things because when you say their name and think about them, they act like they know. I'm not sure how any of this makes sense. Heck. I don't really get it. And I live over here. My uncle is the owner of a small bar in town. It's pretty old school, which means that everything in it is pretty old. There are a lot of different state license plates, souvenirs, and things made of tin and brass. There's also a lot of weird stuff that I don't even know what half of it is because he picked it up while traveling over the years. I'm talking about my uncle's bar because inside the main entry doors, a skull is there. The problem is that it doesn't look like a deer skull. Yes, it has antlers like a deer, but this skull is long and thin, has many cracks, and has a mouth that doesn't look like a deer's. The mouth looks more like a person's. As a child, I thought it was just a weird-looking deer, but now that my grandparents have told me all the myths and legends of our people, I'm starting to think that that skull is not a deer head, and I'm afraid to ask my uncle because I'm afraid of what he might say. He'll give me about a month ago. This happened while I was visiting family in Russia. We were on a nice little hike, which we do often, and at the end we set up camp. My family knows that I love scary movies a lot. So, they wanted to take me to this place called Devil's Paths, that is said to be haunted by something. Even though it sounds like a cliché, it's a real place. Anyway, we were talking about the recent scary movies we had seen in the United States. When I saw it, we were about to set up camp and eat lunch. We saw it, though, right next to some thick pine trees. There were some hills that looked like rock mountains. It was about 30 meters away from where we were. But I could see it plain as day. This thing had a very small size. It looked like some kind of animal that was hungry. I swear it was just skin and bones, but it was tall, really tall, and the top of its head looked white, almost as white as bone. It had things on its head that looked like antlers. Its arms were so big that they almost reached the ground. It was as clear as a bell, but it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. Hey, come on, let's go to the fire together. In this cold weather, it will keep you warm. It's right in front of you. It began to point at us and move its finger to show us what to do. This really freaked me out, because I knew that my family couldn't have set someone else up to do this, because this thing was too strangely shaped to be someone in a costume. I just stood there and watched as this thing slowly turned around and walked down the hill. It was on "Will You Be There?" It is said in the background. When I looked at my uncle, he was completely stunned. My cousins didn't do anything. After a few seconds, we all came out of our trance, grabbed our backpacks and other things, turned around, and ran as fast as we could back down the hiking trail to the parking lot where we started. My cousins were just mumbling. I didn't know what they were saying in the back seat because they didn't talk out loud. My uncle was driving, but he didn't say a word and just kept looking straight ahead. I tried to talk with him so I could ask him what we were seeing. Is that the creature that local legend says lives there? My uncle put the window down a little bit and lit a cigarette. He took a deep breath, turned his head toward me, and said, "No, that's not what people think over here. It looks like something from your country. I've never seen it before. I have spent the last 2 summers leading canoe trips on Lake of the Woods in Minnesota. I have had a few close calls and heard many stories from other guides about their experiences. People have lived in this area for thousands of years, and we can't camp in many places because they are Indian reservations. I've heard that this area is called Wendigo country, and that places like the Wendigo Isles are named after it. For example, I've heard a lot of scary stories from other guides that I could tell you if you're interested, but I'll just tell you about this one thing that happened to me. On this trip, it was just me, another guide, and about 7 kids. After a long day of paddling, we stayed the first night at a campsite called Little Trisket. One of the campers we were with was on the autism spectrum, and while we were making dinner over the fire, it was hard for him to talk to us. Something caught his eye in the woods behind us. He kept asking, "Who is that man in the woods?" and describing the man as tall and skinny and all white. We told him there was no one there and that we had counted everyone to make sure they were all here. So we looked, but there was nothing there. So we just ignored it and went back to making dinner. That same night, another camper was in her tent by herself because she was the only girl on our trip. As my co-guide and I were starting to nod off, we heard her say, "Stop, Gilly Vanilli." When we told her what was in her tent, she just shrugged it off and went to sleep. We asked her what was wrong, and she said that her tent was shaking, and since it wasn't windy, she thought it was us. All of the boys were in their tents, and we were all in ours, too. When we took down her tent, we took out the stakes, and 2 of them were completely bent at a 90 degrees angle. We tried to bend it, but no matter what we did, we couldn't get it to move back at all. I've been in crazy wind storms out there with probably 30 to 40 miles per hour winds, but I'd never seen a stake like that. But when we left Little Trisket, the strange things stopped, and we had a great trip. Afterwards, when we got back to base camp, I talked to a guy who had spent the next night at the same campsite. She told me there was some kind of big white animal at that campsite before I even said anything. She told us that she was going to the bathroom way back in the woods and thought that another camper had come to her bathroom spot by accident and ran away. But when she got back, everyone was still there, and no one had even left the fire while she was gone. There are stories and events that are much scarier. Since then, other guides have worked with these ghosts up here. I could think of it. I've loved hunting squirrels, deer. At first, my father and I did it together, but after he died, I couldn't help but see more and more of myself out there. It was his favorite thing to do, and I was lucky enough to do it with him. After what happened next, I'm afraid to go back into the woods because I miss him so much. Back then, it was a snowy Saturday morning, and the sun had just come up. I had been looking for squirrels, but the woods were dead quiet, so I sat still under the skeleton of an old oak tree. It didn't matter if I saw or killed anything. The best part was the beauty. Getting up early and taking it all in was worth every second of quiet and cold. All of a sudden, a rough grunting sound brought everything to life. At first, the sound was like a buck's call, but it was much lower and more guttural. At first, I thought that a big deer was lying in the snow and dying. Then it came back, but this time it was close enough to make my heart stop. Whatever it was wasn't dead, but it had moved a distance that was impossible. I had no idea what I was hearing during those few seconds. I had no choice but to sit still and try not to breathe. Just a few minutes later, I saw something that has completely changed my life for the worse. From behind a tree, the head of a deer with eyes that looked sick and had way too much white showed up. I can see 15 yards ahead of me. The worst part was that it didn't move at all. It was 9 feet above the ground. I've never seen a deer that tall before. This thing looked like it had just been in a fight while trying to fight off a deadly virus. When a hand with claws showed up just below it, it wasn't a pretty sight. I could tell this wasn't a deer. It sounds like a story from a book of scary stories for kids. I know, and I wish all of it were true. But these skeletal fingers wrapped around the tree's trunk, and their nasty nails slid along the bark. Because of how its head was turned. It looked like it was staring right into my soul. My instincts took over, and I quickly grabbed my gun and ran back to my truck. I had never run so fast in my life, but when I heard that grunting again, it seemed to get closer and closer, no matter how far I ran away. When I got to my truck, I opened the door, slammed it shut, started the engine, and floored it. But before I really left, I made a mistake. I looked into the woods as if the things King had in his clawed hands had been copied and pasted. We are now sticking out of a pine tree at the edge of the forest. Sorry, Dad, but I'm not sure if I'll ever go back there again. Stephen met a Wendigo more than once during the summer about 5 or 6 years ago. The first time he met her was on a trip in the summer, when they were going to Shoal Lake. It was a 6-day trip that involved paddling about 60 miles. And one portage, where you carry your canoes and packs overland to another lake. On day 4, they were taken back through Jingport out of Seoul. The name of a portage is Dead Man's Portage. The portage from Lake of the Woods to Shoal is called Dead Man's Portage, which sounds like something from a scary story. I don't know why they call it that, but it fits. About a half-mile from the portage, there was a campsite that gets used a lot. We just call this campsite Dead Man's. Stephen and his group left Shoal Lake, planning to go through Dead Man's Port and stay at the campsite right after it. It's a bit long, but it's a nice highway with not too many ups and downs. I believe. Even the Canadian Parks Service cleans up this portage, which may be the only one in Lake of the Woods that gets regular maintenance. The short paddle from the portage to the campsite is a beautiful and strange one. All the way, it goes through a little bit of land with 10-15 foot high cliffs covered in moss and beautiful cedars on both sides. Stephen and his group got to Dead Man's campsite. Later, right before they went to bed, they realized they had left their sleeping bag pack at the end of the portage. It was around 9 p.m., so it was getting pretty dark. Stephen and another camper set out in a canoe with their headlamps to quickly get the pack. It took them about 30 minutes to paddle, and at this point, the only thing you could really see was what your headlamp was shining on. They picked up the pack and turned around to go back. Soon after they left, Stephen heard loud splashes as things fell into the water behind them. At first, he didn't believe it because there are a lot of beavers in the area, and when they slap their tails, it sounds like a big rock being thrown into the water. However, the splashes kept coming, and they were right on his back as they kept paddling. Stephen turned around and saw a big rock about the size of a basketball fly toward him and land in the water next to him. They start paddling like crazy to get back to the campsite and away from whatever was throwing these huge, heavy rocks at them. Stephen looked back between paddle strokes and saw two bright red eyes about 15 feet up on one of the cliffs. They got back home after the rocks stopped coming at them. Okay. The rest of their trip went well without any more problems, but I don't like going through Dead Man's Portage and always make sure I don't leave any packs behind when I do. Around dusk, the first sign of trouble showed up for my father and I during our camping trip. The day had been hot and sticky. So we waited until the sun was starting to go down before we started our fire and made dinner. Dad put the cast iron over the fire to get it ready to cook the walleye we had caught and filleted earlier, but it wasn't long before the camp smelled like rotting flesh. When we first smelled the fish, we thought it might have gone bad, but when we took a closer look, it was clear that the smell wasn't coming from it. We hadn't smelled it all day, not even when it was the hottest, when you'd think the smell of a rotting body would be the worst. Still, we decided to look around to see if there was a dead or dying animal nearby. It would be our bad luck to have set up camp next to a dead animal that smells bad. We walked up and down the nearby trails, sniffing and looking, but we didn't find anything. We couldn't find any rotting bodies, which was even stranger. The rotting smell seemed to get stronger. No matter where we went, it seemed like the whole forest was being eaten up or falling apart around us. What we did find, which was kind of strange, were deep hoof prints that looked like they were made by a very big deer. My dad was especially amazed by this because he has worked with game fish and parks for most of his life, and he had never seen deer prints that big before. Since we couldn't figure out where the smell was coming from, we decided to head back to camp. So by then, it was getting dark, and the smell just kept getting worse, even though there was no obvious source. When we got back to the campsite, we took the fish out of the cooler and cooked it, but neither of us had much of an appetite at that point. We sat around the fire, picking at our food and trying not to talk about how bad it smelled. I started to hear something moving in the bush far away. "Is that what you hear?" I asked my dad if whatever it was big enough to be moving through the trees and breaking what sounded like big branches. My dad shrugged. He tried to reassure me by saying, "There's nothing too scary around here," but I could tell from his face and voice that he was a little scared himself. I almost asked him if he wanted to get up early and leave. I really wanted him to just say yes, but we were both putting on a good show and acting like everything was fine. I was afraid to ask him directly, though, because I didn't want to look like a wimp on the trip if I was wrong about him. "What's going on?" Then my dad said. I almost fell out of my camp chair. He was looking back into the woods over my shoulder, and when I turned around, I saw what he was looking at. At first, it looked like dead tree branches were moving side to side about 7 feet above the ground. At this point, it was getting dark, and the moonlight was just right for us to see the pointed sticks. One might have thought it was the wind blowing through a dead tree, except there wasn't much of a breeze that night and the movement wasn't in any kind of rhythm. It looked like it was moving on its own, not with anything else. Who could it be? Dad yelled. I don't know what he thought someone was doing to make a tree move in that way, but he did. But when the next thing happened, we both ran up the trail at the same time to get to the jeep. The figure went up another foot and then went under the points of the sticks. A pair of yellow eyes shone through the darkness. We didn't know what we were looking at until the eyes came into view. It looked like a big deer's head with antlers, but it was at least 8 feet off the ground. About 8 or 9 at this point. We left everything behind and ran back to the jeep as fast and hard as we could. Once we were inside, we didn't even bring our gear with us. Instead, we decided to spend the night in Hot Springs and get a hotel. We thought we'd go back for the gear in the morning when it was light out. We stayed up all night at the hotel talking about what we'd seen and hoping it wasn't real. As a game fish and parks guy, my dad's first thought was that it was just an old buck with wasting disease, which is a common neurological disease in the area and can make deer look like zombies. In the end, this is what we decided we'd seen. We thought we'd both just been scared in the middle of the night, and had a bad stomachache the next day because we hadn't eaten. When we got back to the campsite, we threw that idea out the window. Whatever we had seen had found our campsite, destroyed our tents, put out our fire, and thrown everything we had all over the forest floor. There were at least 10 inches of front-to-back hoof prints all over the campsite, and that was just one set. Keep in mind that whatever was there before was only walking on 2 feet. I don't think we'll be going back to the hills for a while. I heard about your channel from my brother. He likes to listen. I'm new to this kind of thing, to be honest. But now that we've talked about some things, I'm more interested. I saw the creature that everyone says doesn't exist, and it scared me. So I'm more interested in what other people have to say and what they've seen. My experience happened last September on my honeymoon in Kauai, Hawaii. If you don't know, Hawaii is made up of 6 islands. You can visit. Most people go to Oahu or Maui for the nightlife in the big resorts, but my husband and I prefer to be in nature. So we went to Kauai, which is called the Garden Isle. Hiking the cultural trail is one of the best things to do in Hawaii. It's a tough trail. It goes all the way along these dangerous, steep cliffs. The whole trail is 11 miles one way, and if you're up for that long of a hike, you can camp at the end of the beach, which is an interesting fact. In the 1970s, there was a group of hippies who stayed out there and lived in the Colonial Valley at the end of the trail. I can't say that I blame them, but in the end, the government came and pretty much kicked them out. Anyway, my husband and I like to hike, but we only wanted to do an 8-mile round trip. We decided to go in for 2 miles on the main trail, then stop at Hanakopiai Beach, then head 2 miles inland to swim at Hanakopiai Falls, and then hike back out. We only had a week in Hawaii, so it was just a day trip. The trail is pretty, but it would be hard for a couple in their 40s to walk it. Even though the views are great, we were glad to get to the beach and be able to stop and rest. It's a beautiful beach, but after about 15 minutes I was ready to start exploring. My husband just wanted to chill out on the beach. So I went down to the beach for a little while to check out some of the caves. On that beach, there is a strong riptide. Locals have put up a sign that says how many tourists have drowned, but I knew I had plenty of time because it was low tide. I walked about a quarter mile down the beach before I got to the first cave. It was cool to look at, but not very deep. Then I remembered that I'd left my camera on the beach with our other stuff. So, that was kind of bad. I thought about going back for it, but decided that once we got to the falls, there would be plenty of things to take pictures of, especially when I came out of the cave and was about to walk down the beach to the next one when I saw a path. It looked like an animal path went up the side of the cliff next to the first cave. It seemed to end at the second cave, which was about 30 feet above the beach. One of the best things about Hawaii is that they don't have any snakes on the land. They do have a sea snake that can kill you. So, even though you're bushwhacking in a jungle, you don't have to worry about getting bitten by a snake. It didn't take me long to get to the opening of the upper cave, where the sun was shining in at an angle, which was awesome. It was bright enough that I didn't have to take my flashlight off my belt yet. To get in, I had to lower my head. But then the cave's ceiling went up a little, and I could almost stand up straight. There are no signs that people have been there, like graffiti or trash, which is a good thing. I went a little farther in and saw that it was split into 2 rooms. At this point, I hesitated because I thought my husband would freak out if he couldn't see me on the beach. But, hey, it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, so I took my flashlight off and went to look around the corner. The left chamber didn't go anywhere for a while, and it smelled kind of bad. I went back and tried the right-hand chamber. When I shined my flashlight over the walls, I saw lots of sparkly things in them. I think they were minerals. I was so interested in it that I ran the beam up and down over it. I took another step forward, and then I heard a hiss. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I stopped in my tracks. I pointed the light down and thought, oh my god, they were wrong about the snakes, but there was nothing on the cave floor. When I heard another hiss and wildly bounced the light up and around, I saw it. The eyes first flashed, and the pupils were black slits. Then the thing hissed again, moved forward, and came fully into the light. I shouldn't tell you. It was as tall as I was and looked like a cross between a dragon and a lizard. I could see rows of teeth, like an alligator, and the scales on its body were green. I've never seen anything more scary. It was standing on 2 legs, with the tips of its front legs sticking out and long, black claws that scared me out of my mind. I tried to go backwards, but I ran into a rock wall. My blood was as cold as ice, and the thing looked like it could eat me. I was able to turn around and get out, but a rock at the entrance hurt my toe as I climbed over it. I didn't care. I didn't even notice I was running down the cliff path at that point, and I almost fell down the steep slope. But I got back on my feet just in time. I finally stopped when I got to the beach and looked back up. It wasn't going after me. I wonder if it ever even left the cave during the day. Perhaps not. So, since my husband is very practical, I was afraid to tell him about what happened. I just said that I saw something strange and didn't know what it was, but that we weren't going into any caves up there, and then I realized that my toe hurt a lot. I think I might have broken the bone, so we didn't go to the waterfall after all. Instead, we spent the rest of our honeymoon at the beach instead of hiking. I did want to say something quickly. You know, Channel isn't that far away, and there's that old song called Puff, the Magic Dragon, even though it's sung in a funny way. It was really about Honolulu, Hawaii, which makes me think there might have been a dragon legend there a long time ago. If there was, it might have been because people in the area saw something that looked like a cross between a lizard and a person. What do you think, guys? Well, I sure have a tale to tell you. I'm still thinking about it, and my therapist says that talking about it is better than keeping it all inside. So I'll start by telling you a little about myself. I'm a junior at the University of Maine, where I study environmental science and engineering. My name is Samantha. I hike a lot and love being outside in any way, from running and skiing to fishing, camping, boating, and even watching birds. For me, it's just a quiet thing to do. Again, my therapist says it's good for me because it gives me some quiet time away from my anxiety. I wouldn't say I'm very good at watching birds, but I've gotten better because I took a class on ornithology this past semester. I first learned a few important things about birding. You need a good pair of binoculars at all times. Second, a field guide can be your best friend, but your ears can also be your best tool. Birds have many different sounds they use to tell each other what they want. They might do this to find a mate, let others know they've found food, warn others, give directions, or even warn of danger. Some birds have a lot of different calls, songs, and sounds. These sounds usually come with a variety of different pitches and ways of making sounds. I've learned the sounds of the most common birds in the Northeast, and I'm pretty good at putting them with the right birds. I've also been hiking enough to be able to tell if a bird is male or female, a youngster, an adult, or even an old person by the way it looks. I am determined to learn everything there is to learn. I've been going out on the weekends almost every morning to see what I can find. Early morning is usually the best time to watch birds because it's not too hot for them and some of their predators aren't up yet, or have just gone to bed. They have a saying, right? Whoever gets up early gets the worm. I've been hiking at Moose Point State Park for about a mile and have just seen a razorbill, some dark-eyed juncos, a pair of winter wrens, and a couple of winter wrens. The day after a big storm, the birds were busy in the morning. I started hiking up a hill to get a better view and maybe see some birds flying by from above. I found a winding path up the mountain that led to a great view from above. It was on some dusty rocks in a clearing. I took a break by sitting down, and it wasn't long before I felt a shadow pass over me. As fast as I could, I looked up, but I couldn't see anything in the sky. But then I heard rustling about 100 yards away in the trees. I took out my binoculars to try to see more clearly. I could only catch a glimpse of a black wing flying in and out of a huge pine tree. The whole tree trunk was swaying back and forth, and needles and branches were flying out in all directions. Suddenly, this creature popped out of the tree. I didn't think it could have been a vulture, a hawk, or an eagle. I thought it might have been an osprey, but its wings were too big and its face didn't look anything like a bird's. The most surprising thing about it was that it didn't really have a face at all. Only these bright red eyes that seemed to be looking down. It almost had the body of a person, but it was covered in a thin layer of black fuzz and had huge wings that spread out almost 2 yards wide. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It started to dart down below the trees, so I stood up with my binoculars and watched it for a while. There was silence in the whole forest, but then I heard a deer. It was definitely a deer that was hurting and bleating. Another tree's leaves shook, and then this creature came flying by with a piece of dough stuck between its hands. It was a little off balance because it was carrying the weight, but it flapped its huge, smooth wings like a smart bird. Still, I watched the animal as long as I could with my binoculars. Eventually, I lost sight of it for good. I sat there for a while in shock, and then I walked down the hill to leave that forest. As I got closer to where the deer had been caught, I saw fallen trees, broken branches, and leaves all over the place. It was clear that there had been a fight, and I got out of there as fast as I could. I spent the rest of the day looking up what I had seen, but it doesn't seem likely that it happened this far north. I really think I saw what people call a mothman. Neither a bird nor a bat looked like it. I'll keep an eye out for more signs of it, but I probably won't go back into those woods by myself because I can't stop thinking that if it could pick up an adult deer, why couldn't it also pick me up? Tell me in the comments what you think of these stories. Several times per day.